The call came on a Tuesday evening, just as I was settling in for my usual post-work routine. A glass of red wine, a good book, and the soft jazz playing in the background. My recipe for unwinding after a long day at the office. But when I saw Mom's name flash across my phone screen, I knew my peaceful evening was about to be shattered. 12 years. That's how long it had been since I'd spoken to her. 12 years of building a life for myself, far away from the toxic dynamics that had defined my childhood. I let the phone ring once, twice, 3 times, my hand hovering over it, debating whether to answer or let it go to voicemail. On the 4th ring, I picked up. Hello? My voice sounded strange, even to my own ears. A mixture of wariness and barely concealed tension. Harper? Mom's voice crackled through the line, sounding older than I remembered. It's about your father. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for whatever was coming next. In the background, I could hear the faint beeping of hospital machines, and my stomach clenched. He's very ill, Harper. The doctors, they don't think he has much time left. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been half expecting them. I hadn't seen my father in over a decade, but the thought of him lying in a hospital bed, slipping away, made my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't quite name. I know that things haven't been good between us, Mom continued, her voice wavering. But he's asking for you. Please, Harper, come home. Home. The word echoed in my mind, bringing with it a flood of memories I'd spent years trying to suppress. The constant comparisons to my perfect sister, Lily. The disappointed looks when I failed to live up to impossible expectations. The crushing weight of never feeling good enough. I'll think about it, I managed to say, my throat tight. I need some time. We don't have much time, Harper, Mom replied, a note of desperation creeping into her voice. Please, just consider it. After we hung up, I sat in silence, the half-empty wine glass forgotten on the coffee table. The jazz continued to play, but it felt discordant now, at odds with the turmoil in my mind. I got up and walked to the ice window, looking out at the twinkling lights of the city I'd made my home. Memories washed over me, unbidden and unwelcome. I was 8 years old again, proudly showing Dad my report card. All A's, except for 1 B+ in math. His response? That's nice, sweetie. Did you see Lily's card? All A's, and she's taking advanced classes. I was 13, winning 2nd place in the school science fair. Mom's words still rang in my ears. Oh, honey, 2nd place is good. But imagine how proud we'd be if you'd won first, like Lily did last year. I was 17, announcing that I'd been accepted to college on a partial scholarship. The lukewarm congratulations followed immediately by gushing praise for Lily's full ride to an Ivy League school. Every milestone, every achievement, always overshadowed by my sister's supposed superiority. It had taken years of therapy to understand that the problem wasn't me. It was them. Their constant favoritism, their inability to see me as anything other than second best. I'd built a life for myself here, far from the suffocating atmosphere of my childhood home. I had a successful career, good friends who valued me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. I was happy, truly happy, for the first time in my life. And now, with one phone call, it all threatened to come crashing down. I turned away from the window and picked up my phone again, scrolling through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. My thumb hovered over it for a moment before I pressed call. Hey, Ava, it's me. I need some advice. Ava had been my rock since college, the sister I'd always wished I had. She listened patiently as I poured out the whole story, my words tumbling over each other in a rush. Oh, Harper, she said when I finally fell silent. I'm so sorry. What are you thinking of doing? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I don't know. Part of me wants to ignore the whole thing, pretend I never got that call. But he's still your dad. Ava finished for me. Yeah, I whispered. He is. We talked for another hour, weighing pros and cons, discussing worst-case scenarios and best-case outcomes. By the time we hung up, I knew what I had to do. I pulled up my laptop and booked a flight for the next morning. As I packed a small suitcase, my hands shaking slightly, I tried to prepare myself for what was to come. I was going back to the place I'd sworn I'd never return to, back to face the family that had hurt me so deeply. But this time, I told myself, it would be different. This time, I was going back on my own terms. I was no longer the insecure girl desperate for approval. I was Harper James, successful marketing executive, strong and independent woman. I just hoped that strength would be enough to face whatever awaited me back home. As I lay in bed that night, sleep eluding me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was going to change everything. For better or worse, nothing would be the same after this. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my racing thoughts, and whispered a quiet prayer to whoever might be listening. Give me strength, I murmured into the darkness. Give me strength to face them, to stand my ground, and to finally break free of the past. Little did I know just how much strength I would need in the days to come. The flight to my hometown felt both interminable and far too short. Each mile that passed beneath the plane's wings brought me closer to a confrontation I'd been avoiding for over a decade. I tried to distract myself with work emails and mindless games on my phone, but my thoughts kept circling back to the impending reunion. What would they look like now? Would Dad be as imposing as I remembered? Or would illness have diminished him? Would Mom still have that perpetually disappointed look in her eyes? And Lily? My stomach churned at the thought of seeing my sister again. As the plane began its descent, I gripped the armrests tightly, taking deep breaths to calm my racing heart. I could do this. I had to do this. The familiar landscape of my childhood came into view as we landed. Rolling hills, dense forests, and the sprawling suburbs where I'd grown up. It was strange how little had changed when I felt like a completely different person. I rented a car at the airport, preferring the freedom it offered over relying on family to pick me up. As I drove through the streets of my hometown, memories assaulted me at every turn. The park where I'd played as a child, always in Lily's shadow. The high school where I'd struggled to carve out an identity for myself. The ice cream shop where I'd had my first kiss, a brief moment of normalcy in a life that often felt anything but. Finally, I pulled up in front of the house I'd once called home. It looked smaller than I remembered, the paint a little faded, the garden not quite as well tended as it used to be. I sat in the car for a long moment, gathering my courage. You can do this, I whispered to myself. You're not that little girl anymore. With a deep breath, I got out of the car and walked up the familiar path to the front door. Before I could even ring the bell, it swung open, revealing my mother. She looked older, of course. 12 years will do that to a person. Her hair was more gray than brown now, and there were deep lines around her eyes and mouth. But it was the expression on her face that caught me off guard. For just a moment, before she schooled her features into a polite smile, I saw a flash of, was it relief? Genuine happiness to see me? Harper, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You came. I nodded stiffly, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to hug her, to fall into the comforting embrace I'd craved as a child. But the larger part, the part that remembered years of subtle put-downs and comparisons, held me back. How is he? I asked instead, following her into the house. Mom's face fell. Not good, I'm afraid. The doctors are saying, well, it's best if you see him yourself. She led me upstairs to my parents' bedroom, now transformed into a makeshift hospital room. The sight of my father, once so strong and intimidating, now frail and hooked up to various machines, hit me harder than I'd expected. "Dad," I said softly, approaching the bed. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on me with visible effort. "Harper?" he rasped. "Is that really you?" I nodded, fighting back tears. Despite everything, seeing him like this hurt more than I'd anticipated. "My little girl," he said, a weak smile crossing his face. "You came home." I wanted to correct him, to say that this wasn't my home anymore, that I'd built a life for myself far away from here. But looking at him, so diminished and clearly in pain, I couldn't bring myself to say the words. Instead, I sat in the chair beside his bed and took his hand. It felt papery and fragile in mine, so different from the strong hands I remembered from childhood. "How are you feeling?" I asked, wincing at how inadequate the question sounded. Dad chuckled weakly. "Oh, been better." His eyes roamed my face as if trying to memorize every detail. "You look good, Harper. Successful. I always knew you had it in you." The words, probably meant as a compliment, stung. Now, after years of dismissing my achievements, he wanted to claim some sort of pride in my success? Before I could respond, the door opened again and Lily walked in. My sister looked as perfect as ever, not a hair out of place, designer clothes, flawless makeup. But there was a brittleness to her smile, a tension in her shoulders that I'd never seen before. "Harper," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "It's been a long time." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The old feelings of inadequacy, of constantly being measured and found wanting, threatened to overwhelm me. "Girls," Dad said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My girls. I'm so glad you're both here." Mom moved to stand behind Lily, her hand on my sister's shoulder. The picture-perfect family tableau, with me on the outside looking in. Some things, it seemed, never changed. "Harper," Dad continued, squeezing my hand weakly. "There's something I need to talk to you about the future, about taking care of things when I'm gone." I felt a chill run down my spine at his words. This, I realized, was why they'd really called me back. Not for a touching family reunion, not to make amends for years of favoritism and emotional neglect. No, they wanted something from me. And judging by the looks on Mom and Lily's faces, I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly what it was. As I sat there, caught between my dying father and the family that had never truly accepted me, I realized that the real battle was just beginning. Whatever they wanted from me, whatever they expected, I knew one thing for certain. This time, I wouldn't let them dictate the terms. This time, I would stand my ground. Little did I know just how much that resolve would be tested in the days to come. The tension in the room was palpable as Dad struggled to find the words to continue. I could feel Mom and Lily's eyes on me, their expectations weighing heavily in the air. Part of me wanted to run, to escape back to the life I'd built for myself, far away from all of this. But I forced myself to stay, to hear what Dad had to say. "Harper," he began again, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've done so well for yourself. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I'm proud of what you've accomplished." The words, which I'd longed to hear for so much of my life, now rang hollow. I remained silent, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Your sister," Dad continued, glancing at Lily, "she's had a harder time. You know how sensitive she is, how the world can be too much for her sometimes." I bit back a bitter laugh. Sensitive. That was one way to put it. Another might be spoiled, coddled, never expected to stand on her own 2 feet. "What are you trying to say, Dad?" I asked, my voice coming out sharper than I'd intended. He sighed, closing his eyes for a moment. "I'm worried about her, Harper. About what will happen to her when I'm gone. Your mother, she'll need help too." And there it was. The real reason they'd called me back. Not to reconnect, not to make amends, but to ensure that their golden child would be taken care of. What exactly are you asking me to do? I said, even though I already knew the answer. We need your help, sweetie, Mom chimed in, her hand still on Lily's shoulder. Financially, your father and we've done our best, but with the medical bills and everything else. You want me to support Lily? I finished for her, my voice flat. To take care of her financially after Dad's gone. Lily at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. Harper, I held up a hand, cutting her off. Let me get this straight. You call me back here after 12 years, not to reconcile, not to try and repair our relationship, but to ask me to bankroll my sister's life? It's not like that, Mom protested weakly. Isn't it? I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. For years, I was never good enough. Every achievement, every success was dismissed because it wasn't quite as good as Lily's. And now that I've made something of myself, despite your lack of support, you want to use that success to continue enabling her? Harper, please, Dad wheezed, reaching for my hand. Try to understand. Your sister, she's not as strong as you. She needs... What she needs, I interrupted, my voice shaking with suppressed emotion, is to learn to stand on her own 2 feet. What she needs is what I needed all those years ago, parents who believe in her capabilities instead of treating her like she'll break at the slightest challenge. Lily's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. You don't understand, she said. You've always been the strong one, the independent one. I'm not like you, Harper. I can't. You can't, because they never let you, I shot back. They never expected you to. I turned back to my parents, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. Mom, her face a mixture of desperation and disappointment. Dad, frail and sick, but still trying to manipulate the situation to his liking. I'm sorry, I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. I'm sorry that you're ill, Dad. I'm sorry that things have been difficult, but I won't do this. I won't enable the same toxic dynamics that drove me away in the first place. Harper, be reasonable, Mom pleaded. We're family. Family takes care of each other. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Family? Is that what we are? Because from where I'm standing, we stopped being a family a long time ago. A family supports each other. A family believes in each other's potential. A family doesn't play favorites or tear one child down to build another up. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I've spent years in therapy, trying to undo the damage that growing up in this house did to me. I've worked hard to build a life for myself, to believe in my own worth, and I won't jeopardize that for you, not anymore. The room fell silent, the only sound the steady beeping of Dad's heart monitor. Lily was openly crying now, Mom's arm around her shoulders. Dad looked defeated. It was an expression I'd never seen on his face before, and despite everything, it made my heart ache. I think it's best if I go, I said quietly. I'll be in town for a few days. If you want to talk, really talk, not just ask for money, you know how to reach me. With that, I turned and walked out of the room, out of the house that had never truly felt like home. As I got into my rental car, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I managed to drive a few blocks before I had to pull over, overcome by the tsunami of emotions crashing over me. I cried then, really cried, for what felt like hours. I cried for the little girl I'd been, always striving for an approval that never came. I cried for the years of self-doubt and pain. I cried for the family I'd wanted so desperately to have, and for the realization that I might never have it. When the tears finally subsided, I felt lighter, as if I'd shed a weight I'd been carrying. For years without even realizing it, I pulled out my phone and dialed a familiar number. Ava? It's me. Can you talk? I poured out the whole story to my best friend, my voice occasionally breaking as I recounted the confrontation. "Oh, Harper," Ava said when I finished, "I'm so proud of you. You stood your ground. You didn't let them manipulate you." "Then why do I feel so awful?" I asked, staring out at the familiar streets of my hometown. "Because you're a good person," Ava replied gently. "Because part of you still loves them, despite everything." "But Harper, listen to me. You did the right thing. You're breaking the cycle. That's huge." We talked for a while longer, Ava's steady voice helping to ground me. By the time we hung up, I felt steadier, more sure of myself and my decision. I spent the next few days in a kind of limbo. I'd booked a room at a local hotel, unwilling to stay at my parents' house, but also not quite ready to leave town. Every ring of my phone made my heart race, but it was never them. Never the conversation I was both dreading and, if I was honest, with myself hoping for. On the third day, I decided to take a walk through the local park, needing to clear my head. It was a beautiful spring day, the kind that had always made me love this town despite the painful memories associated with it. As I rounded a bend in the path, I nearly collided with someone coming the other way. "Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't—" I began, then stopped short as I recognized the person in front of me. "Lily?" My sister looked as startled as I felt. She was dressed in workout clothes, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, a far cry from her usual put-together appearance. "Harper," she said, her voice uncertain. I didn't expect to see you here." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, neither quite sure what to say. Finally, I gestured to a nearby bench. "Do you want to sit? Maybe talk?" Lily nodded, following me to the bench. We sat in silence for a while, watching a group of children play on the swings nearby. "I used to bring you here," Lily said suddenly. "Do you remember, when you were little and Mom and Dad when things were bad at home, I'd take you to the park, push you on the swings." The memory hit me like a physical blow. I did remember. Vaguely. The feeling of soaring through the air, Lily's laughter behind me. It was a good memory, one of the few I had of my sister that wasn't tainted by competition or resentment. "I remember," I said softly. Lily turned to look at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, Harper. I'm so sorry. For everything." I felt my own eyes welling up. "Lily—" "No, please let me say this," she interrupted. "You were right the other day, about all of it. I've had a lot of time to think since then, about the way things were, the way Mom and Dad treated us. Treated you." She took a shaky breath. "I didn't see it then. Or maybe I didn't want to see it. It was easier to accept their praise, to be the golden child. I never stopped to think about what it was doing to you." I listened in stunned silence. As my sister continued, "When you left, after that big fight senior year, I was so angry. I thought you were selfish, abandoning the family like that. But now I see. You were saving yourself. You were doing what I never had the courage to do." "Lily," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "I never wanted to leave you behind. I couldn't stay. Not and remain sane." She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I know that now. And Harper, what Mom and Dad asked you to do the other day, it wasn't right. I want you to know, I never asked them to do that. I never wanted to be a burden on you." I reached out hesitantly, taking my sister's hand. It was the first time we'd touched in over a decade. "You're not a burden, Lily. You're my sister. I can't enable the old patterns anymore. For either of us." Lily squeezed my hand. "I understand, and I think I need to follow your lead. Stand on my own 2 feet, like you said." We sat there for a long time, talking more openly than we ever had before. Lily told me about her struggles over the years, the anxiety and depression she'd hidden behind a perfect facade, the way she'd felt trapped by our parents' expectations even as she'd seemed to fulfill them effortlessly. I shared my own journey, the hard years of self-discovery, the therapy, the gradual building of a life and identity separate from my family's expectations. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, I felt a shift between us, not a complete healing. There was too much history, too much pain for that, but a beginning, a chance. "What happens now?" Lily asked as we stood to leave. I took a deep breath, considering. "I don't know exactly, but I think maybe we start over, build something new, something healthier, if you want to." Lily nodded, a small, hopeful smile on her face. "I'd like that." As we walked out of the park, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't expected to find on this trip home. Hope. Hope for a relationship with my sister based on mutual understanding and respect. Hope for a future where the wounds of the past could begin to heal. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still conversations to be had with our parents, boundaries to be set and maintained. But for the first time in years, I felt like it might be possible to have some kind of relationship with my family without sacrificing my own well-being in the process. As Lily and I parted ways, promising to meet for coffee the next day, I pulled out my phone and called Ava. "Hey," I said when she picked up, "you'll never guess what just happened." The next morning, I woke up feeling more rested than I had since arriving in town. The conversation with Lily had lifted a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. As I got ready to meet her for coffee, I allowed myself to feel a cautious optimism about the future. The cafe we'd agreed on was a new place, one that hadn't existed when I'd lived here. It was modern and airy, a far cry from the stuffy, traditional places our parents had always preferred. As I walked in, I spotted Lily already seated at a table by the window, 2 steaming mugs in front of her. "I hope you still take your coffee?" "Black," she said as I sat down, pushing one of the mugs towards me. I nodded, oddly touched that she'd remembered. Some things never change. We sipped our coffee in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us seemingly gathering our thoughts. "I talked to Mom and Dad last night," Lily said finally, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "About everything." I felt my body tense involuntarily. "How did that go?" Lily sighed. "About as well as you'd expect." Mom cried, "Dad? Well, you know Dad. He doesn't do well with change." I nodded, all too familiar with our father's stubborn resistance to anything that challenged his worldview. "But," Lily continued, a note of determination in her voice, "I stood my ground. I told them that things need to change, that I'm not going to be their perfect, dependent daughter anymore." I felt a surge of pride for my sister. "That must have been hard." "It was," she admitted, "but it was also liberating. For the first time. I felt like I was speaking for myself, not just saying what I thought they wanted to hear." We talked for hours, delving deeper into our shared past and our hopes for the future. Lily told me about her secret dream of opening a small bookstore, something she'd never dared to pursue because it didn't fit with our parents' grand plans for her. I shared stories of my life in the city, my career successes and failures, the found family of friends who had supported me through the years. As our conversation wound down, Lily reached across the table and took my hand. "Harper, I know it's a lot to ask, but would you come with me to see Dad today? I think it's time we all talked, really talked." I felt a knot of anxiety form in my stomach at the thought. But looking at Lily's face, seeing the mix of hope and determination there, I knew I couldn't say no. "Okay," I said, squeezing her hand. Together. The drive to our parents' house was tense, both of us lost in our own thoughts. As we pulled up in front of the familiar structure, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Mom answered the door, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw us both. Girls? Come in, come in. We followed her upstairs, to Dad's room. He was sitting up in bed today, looking slightly better than he had during my last visit. His eyes narrowed as we entered, a mixture of confusion and wariness on his face. Lily? Harper? What's going on? Lily and I exchanged a glance, silently agreeing on who should speak first. I stepped forward, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. We need to talk, Dad, all of us, about the past, about the future, about how things are going to be different from now on. For the next few hours, we talked. Really talked in a way we never had before. There were tears from all of us. There was anger, years of pent-up resentment and hurt bubbling to the surface. There were moments when I was sure it was all going to fall apart, that the gulf between us was too wide to bridge. But there were also moments of genuine connection, of understanding, however tentative. Mom tearfully admitting that she'd known on some level how unfair their treatment of me had been. Dad, his voice gruff with emotion, acknowledging the pressure he'd put on both of us to fulfill his own dreams. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Years of dysfunction couldn't be erased in a single conversation. But as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the bedroom window, I felt something shift. A foundation, however shaky, for something new. As Lily and I were getting ready to leave, Dad called me back to his bedside. Harper, he said, his voice weak but clear. I'm proud of you. Not for your success, though that's impressive, but for this, for having the strength to come back, to face us, to demand better. I felt tears prick at my eyes. Thank you, Dad. He reached out, taking my hand in his frail one. I can't promise I'll always get it right. Old habits. They die hard. But I want to try, to do better, to be the father you both deserve. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. As Lily and I drove away, the weight of the day settling over us, she turned to me with a small smile. So, she said, want to get some ice cream? For old time's sake? I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. You know what? I'd love that. We ended up at the old ice cream parlor, the one that held so many childhood memories. As we sat on the bench outside, enjoying our cones and watching the sunset over our hometown, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still wounds to heal, trust to rebuild. But for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt hope. Hope for a future where my family could be a source of strength rather than pain. Hope for a relationship with my sister based on mutual support and understanding. As I licked the last bit of ice cream from my fingers, I smiled at Lily. You know, I think this might be the beginning of something good. She nodded, bumping her shoulder against mine affectionately. I think you might be right. We sat there in companionable silence, watching as the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew now that I wouldn't have to face them alone. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift of all.